Anybody else? Sandy Chatfield is at home. So is Lynn Birch, home. Okay. Let's start off with a word of prayer. Our great God and Father, chapter 3. As he finished last week, he said he didn't quite finish, and I'm not quite sure exactly where he got to. So he's got some notes here though on his spreadsheet, and he gives some notes about chapter 2. It says Nebuchadnezzar sees a statue and is told in his dream, and is told that the statue represents 4 successive kingdoms, starting with him and the Babylonian Empire, which were the head of gold. Remember what the other 3 empires were? Medo-Persians came after the Babylonians. Greece came next. Then the Romans. And what was it that he said was going to happen while all that was going on? That he was going to hew something out of a rock over here, and he was going to raise up a kingdom that would last forever. All the kingdoms that he talked about is going to crumble and fall. But he was going to raise one up that wasn't made by man's hands, that was going to last forever. So you've got those 5 that he talks about actually. He talks about the 4 in the dream, and then he talks about one that's not in the dream. So he talks about those. Nebuchadnezzar praises God as a revealer of secrets. As we'll see in chapter 3, though, this chapter we're going to study tonight, he's not truly converted as to the God of Daniel. And lastly, Nebuchadnezzar should have taken from the dream and its interpretation that the kingdom is temporary, or that his kingdom is temporary, and that he needs to serve the one true God who is going to establish the everlasting kingdom. But when we come to chapter 3, we see him commanding worship of the pagan gods. Let's read the first 3 verses of chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then he sent messengers to the high officials, or officers, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officers to come to the dedication of the statue he had set up. So all the officials came and stood before the king Nebuchadnezzar, before the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, let's talk about how big this thing is. How tall? Most of y'all probably says what, 60 cubics? Most of your versions. That's 90 feet, because one cubic is 1.5 yards. So you got 90 feet. Now, if you go to the top right here, that's going to be about 40, maybe 50 feet. I don't remember exactly. So you're going to go almost twice what it is from here to the ceiling. That's a big monument, isn't it? Now, it's 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. It doesn't tell me how deep it is, okay? But if somebody's got a calculator, maybe you can figure out how much that would weigh in gold, and then times what gold is worth today, and tell me about what it's worth. A lot of money. A lot of money. I don't know if I've got that much. I don't know if I could buy that statue. Um, Now I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the statue was. He's got in his notes here that it might be like the monument, the Washington Monument, a structure that just goes straight up. Doesn't have a form, doesn't have anything, just a structure that goes straight up. I don't know. It seems to make sense because it doesn't say anything about what it would look like or that it engraved it in any way. Now, some people may think that it's an image of him. I don't think it is. But why would you think that he would pick a statue like that and make it of pure gold? Think back to his dream. He was the head, and it was gold. He was the man, and it was gold. I think that his humbleness has left him. In other words, yeah. I don't know how much time has passed from the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, but Nebuchadnezzar has become prideful, and has had, and perhaps he has the description of himself as the head of gold, which makes an empire, makes an entire idol of gold. Where else do we see someone make an idol of gold in the Bible? Aaron made one. Aaron made one back in the 32nd chapter of Exodus, 4th verse. And the last part there, it says there in that 4th verse that Aaron took the gold, melted it down, and molded it in the shape of a calf. When the people saw it, they exclaimed, "O Israel, these are the gods that brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Now I think that is similar to what Nebuchadnezzar is thinking, because he wants everybody to bow down and worship this image that he's made. And he calls it down in verse 14, he talks about it being their gods. Okay? I'm catching up on my notes here. At the very least, we know that it is to represent an idol or a god of some sort. What I can't understand is how people make and mold and shape things and call it their god, but yet it can do nothing. Nothing. You ever heard the term knock on wood? I know you have. I've used that a lot in my life, but ever since I heard the definition of what that meant, I've never done it much anymore. It means you're trying to wake your God up so that he can hear you. Remember Mount Carmel? What did he tell them there? Speak a little louder, maybe your God can hear. And they were beating themselves with chains and all those other kind of things. Here we have Nebuchadnezzar in all his pride putting up the statue of gold and calling it a god. Calling it a god. Not only that, he commands that you worship this idol. In chapter 1, we see that Nebuchadnezzar forced immersion on the young Jews into Babylon, culture and education, if you'll remember. They brought in the best, they brought in the smartest, they brought in the ones that weren't blemished, had no form of blemish on them at all, and they brought them in to do what with them? Indoctrinate them. First thing they did was change their names. Next thing they did said, you're going to eat this food and drink this drink. And then they were going to put them in the best schools for 3 years to indoctrinate them into their culture, into their way of thinking, and into the things that they were going to do. Okay? Now we see that they're trying to force them to worship their God. Right? 2 through 7 Talks about all the officials were called to dedicate the idol, including Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Daniel's not included. Does anybody know why Daniel's not included?
Yeah, my guess is, well, reading the commentary, that makes good sense here. That idol was probably out in the, not in the main city area, quite away from the city area.
Probably.
Since, you know,
It was in the land of Dura. What it call it? Plain of Dura. So yes, it's probably not in a town anywhere. That's a guess. Anybody else? He's on vacation. Could be. As good a guess as any. Anybody? It doesn't tell us. It doesn't tell us. We'll come back to that in a minute. Some suggest that he was high enough and favored highly by Nebuchadnezzar. What was it at the end of chapter 2 that we seen about Daniel? Was the king mad with him? No, he was real happy with him. He gave him a very high place in his palace. In his palace. And he sent Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be in good positions, but out of the way, right? So Daniel is in the king's house. So some suggest that he might have been they may have been too afraid to go against him, to accuse him of anything. However, we don't know why he's not mentioned, so any guesses are just speculations. There's no fact into it. He talks about a heralder. What's a heralder? What? A messenger. Okay. So if I gathered everybody in this room and this place was filled and you started shouting what I wanted you to, you would be a heralder, right? A messenger. Okay. So if you've got a really big crowd coming together and he's got all these people coming together, the heralder is going to start shouting what's going to happen here. This is what the proclamation is. Okay? A heralder might also go from town to town to town to town, right? But at this time we would have all the people in one place, so I don't know if there's one heralder or more than one, but they're going around telling people what they want to happen. What is it that they want to happen? What's the heralder say? When the music starts, I want you to bow down and worship. Bow down and worship. What kind of music? That's about what it seemed like. It seemed like they've got an orchestra there to me, because they've got all kinds of different instruments, and I'm not going to read down through there and try to give you all the names of those. But that's what they're doing. So that's what they're going to do. Music starts going, everybody bows down and worships the idol. Worships the idol. Now, he's got 2 or 3 things here that he talks about. In chapter 1, we can think of excuses or why they would just conform and lay down. Remember in chapter 1 when they came into the palace there and they were so well taken care of? Do you imagine they had some friends that were on the other side of the fence that weren't being taken care of so good? They're slaves. They're slaves. They're the ones that are slaves that they're going to do something good with, right? They're going into the palace. They're going to get a bath every day. They're going to have 3 meals a day. They're going to be taught and educated very well. But how about those other Jews that came up with them that weren't so lucky is the best word I can describe it with. What do you think about them? Do you think it would make more sense for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel? Do you think it would make more sense for them to say, hey, we need to conform here a little bit so we don't lose our lives? Well, this is the idea that Jared's got going on here. Here's some excuses that we use and that they could have used. Everyone else is doing it. They weren't alone. They weren't the only 4 that they brought in there. There was a bunch of Jews that they brought in. So everyone else is bowing down. Why don't we go ahead and bow down? Jared has here that if Daniel was off somewhere else, maybe he wouldn't see. Now, I kind of disagree with this friendship that Jared's putting forth here, that Daniel's the leader. I don't see Daniel as the leader. I see 4 strong individuals that have a pact between themselves that I'm not going to defile my body by eating this food or drinking this drink. And I see that they would be strong enough to stand alone. We're going to see Daniel stand alone when we get to chapter 6. These 3 are together. What would it also say about friendships and about the things that we hear about you need an accountability partner and that you need someone to stand with you? We went through a lot of that when we went through Proverbs a couple of years ago in our small groups, right? What's some of the things that you can think of about friends? Why do you need one? They pick you up when you fall down. Pick you up when you fall down. What else? They'll hold you accountable. Right. Why are you doing that? What do you think you're doing? That kind of thing. What else? 2 or 3 strands. If you got one strand, you can break it pretty easy, but if you wrap 2 or 3 together, it makes a tighter rope. That's how come when you look at a rope and you tear it apart, there's a bunch of little strands in there. They just wrap together until you've got something that's really strong. 2 heads are better than one. What are we going to do? 2 heads are better than one. All these are good. All these are what the Bible tells us about. Here you've got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego all together. There's 3 of them. 3 of them. They're friends. I don't know which one's the strongest of the 4 when you put them back together to begin with. Because you'll remember in chapter 1 that they were all together. And in chapter 2, when Daniel learned that they were going to be killed, where was the first place that he went after he convinced them not to kill anybody and give him a day? He went to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and said, hey, we need to pray. We need to pray. That's what they did. Another excuse here he gives. They would live to see another day. What do you think about that one? How much can I preach if I'm in my grave? If I die? If I die because I preach God's word, what good's that going to do anybody? That's what he's putting forth here as an excuse, and it could be an excuse that we use to keep our mouth shut, to not make any ruffles, okay? To conform just a little bit, Psalms, the 6th chapter and the 5th verse says, for the dead do not remember you. Who can praise you from the grave? What can you do when you're dead? You can't do much, can you? So that's an excuse that they're not going to use. Another one, they could bow down but not really mean it in their minds. How good would that do? And the last one that he has here, they could do it just this once and ask for forgiveness later. Is that an excuse that we might use? Anybody got anything else? Any other excuses as to why they could have conformed?
But you know, I think how can I do this thing like that? How
Yeah.
can I do it? They had the faith back then. We should have that same faith. If we touch those,
Yep. It says we come to those same kind of trials, we're tempted too. And he gave the example of Joseph and Potiphar's wife. And what Joseph said, his first thing that he said was, how can I do this great sin against God? Not against Potiphar, but against God. The three still refuse to bow down. Like we see in chapter 1, they again refuse to conform. They're staying true to their convictions to do right in all circumstances, no matter the consequences. You think they understand the consequences? We didn't point it out, but the heralder was saying, if you don't do this, we'll just throw you in a fire furnace and you'll burn up. That's what's going to happen. You'll burn up. But they still refuse. So the Babylonians come to them. They're in verse 12. I'll read verse 12. But there are some Jews, this is the Babylonians that come to the king. There's some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, just to give you some names, sir, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods, and they do not worship the gold statue you have set up. So here we see their jealousy against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What's their jealousy? Huh?
Against who they were. They were Jews.
Okay.
They hated the Jews.
That would be a problem. But there's some more reasons why, though. Well, they did defy them. That'd be another reason, because they're always causing problems, right? Because what happens with the team that don't conform to the coach? Huh? Others follow them, and guess what coach is going to do? Everybody's running these laps. Everybody. Yes, sir. Nope. They weren't happy with it. He promoted them to pretty good spots. But you think about the dream was impossible. Now, how am I going to know what dreams Miss Pat had last night? And when I do know them dreams, how am I going to interpret what the meaning of it is? Now, if you'll tell me the dream, I can give you some ideas of what I think is going on. But if you don't tell me the dream, but yet that's what Daniel did. That's what Daniel did. And that's what him and his friends, when they wouldn't drink the wine or eat the meat because it was against their religion. But where did they wind up? Up at the top. Up at the top. They're jealous of them. They're mad with them. They don't like them. They've taken their places, right? Because if you'll look, it says, Jared has it in it, the Babylonians came and said these things to the king so that they would get in trouble. Babylonians were eager to tell. Eager to tell. You're going to see that again in chapter 6, even worse. Even worse than this. So how does that make Nebuchadnezzar feel? Oh, it'll be all right. It's just Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's what he says, right? Huh? He was mad? Oh. Listen. Yeah. So they bring them to him, and in verse 14, we'll start in 14. We're going to read about 5 or 6 verses here. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I've set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, though, replied, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you have set up." Nebuchadnezzar gives them one more chance to defy and to obey his order. But once again, they defy his order. Now the pressure's really mounting, because this didn't happen just in a private conversation with them. It's going to be before a crowd of people, right? So now they've really got to either they've got a really hard spot that they're in right now, in my opinion. There's this song by Casting Crowns. It's called "Crazy People." Listen to the words of the very first verse when it first starts out. "Who builds a boat with no clouds in sight? Who walks up to a giant and picks a fight? Who turns a lion's den into a petting zoo? Who can have a church in a fiery furnace?" Crazy people. That's what he calls them in his song. Crazy people. I want you to notice there in verse 17 where it says, "He is able to save us." He is able to save us. Reminds me of another spot when Jesus was standing in front of Pilate. You remember what Pilate said to him when Jesus wouldn't respond to his questions? What did he say? "Don't you know that I have the power to take your life or to spare it?" Remember what Jesus said to him? You would have no power at all except my Father give it to you. I want you to look back in chapter 1 and in verse 21, and if you want to read that whole thing, you can, but if you go down to the bottom part of 21 there, he says, he, speaking of God, he controls the course of world events. He removes kings and he sets up kingdoms. He's talking to him. He's talking to him here, and he's Daniel has been revealed this dream to him. And I get this picture that Daniel wakes up in the morning and he says, "Got it." And he just praises God right here in verse 21. If you'll read all that, he's just praising God for all his great, grand, and glorious ways. But that's what he says at the very end. He controls the course of the world events. He removes kings and he sets up kings. And then he goes on to tell him about the 4 kingdoms and how he's the head of gold, and how that he's going to lose his to the Medes and Persians. They're going to lose theirs to the Greeks, and they're going to lose theirs to the Romans. And in the middle of all that, he's going to set up a kingdom that's going to last forever. I think you had your hand up. I'm sorry. I know the book's named after Daniel, and it's all about Daniel, but I don't know if Daniel was the leader of those 4. I don't know that. I see them very strong all together. But yeah, no, they didn't rely on Daniel. It doesn't seem to be anyway. But I want you to notice what they said here. They said he has the power. He has the power to save us if he so chooses. He is able to save us, they said there. In my version, I don't know what somebody else's version say. Verse 17. Anybody? He will save us. Oh, he will deliver us. Okay, yours says a little bit different. But it talks about him being able to do so anyway. But then I want you to see what they say. But even if he does not save us, we will not bow down and serve your gods. In Psalms, the 49th chapter and the 15th verse, it says there, but as for me, God will redeem my life. He will snatch me from the power of the grave. What do you think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thought was going to happen to them when they were thrown in that furnace? Yeah. I believe they were prepared to. I believe they were prepared to. They were ready to die. They were ready to. I don't know in the Bible if I see a greater picture of faith than this one. It would be one thing to refuse to bow down if they knew for a fact that they wouldn't suffer any harm. If they knew what we knew, it'd be much easier, right? Much easier. I don't know if they're in their life how many miracles they've seen. I'll give you an example. David, when he went before Goliath and he slew Goliath, remember what he said? He said, I knew it was going to happen. Why? Because I've defeated a lion and I've defeated a bear. God took me out of their hands, so he will there. You think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had some of those signs? I don't know. They don't talk about it. But how about us? Do we have any of those signs? Do we see where God delivers us, or God helps us, or God answers our prayers? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Would, could, yeah. They still refused to bow down. Even though they were probably prepared to die. Nebuchadnezzar is furious. He fires it up 7 times harder than normal. The people that throw them into the fiery furnace burn up. And then what is it that Nebuchadnezzar says there in verse 25? I see 4 men in there. Didn't we throw just 3 in? But I see 4 men in there, and they're unbound and walking around in the fire, unharmed. And the 4th looks like a god. 4th looks like a god. Some suggest that it is Jesus who is seen in the fire. I wouldn't disagree with that. I wouldn't put an argument for it, but I wouldn't argue against it. That would be a better rendition. King James Version says, like the Son of God. If you look down, a lot of them say, like the Son of a God, or Son of Gods. Some might even say divine person. Of course, the Babylonians would not have known what a Son of God looks like, would they? Jesus came to the earth and walked around among people, and they didn't believe he was the Son of God. Right? So how are we supposed to know what a Son of God looks like? How would the Babylonians that didn't even know God know what he would look like? But yet, this is the explanation that Nebuchadnezzar gave when he saw somebody in there. So who would walk into a burning fire to be with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But the implication is that the fourth person was in there saving them. I don't know if it was an angel. I don't know if it was the Lord himself. I don't know. I don't know. Let's read 28 through 30. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than to serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make this decree. If any people, whatever their race or nation or language, speak a word against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they will be torn limb from limb, and the houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. There is no other God who can rescue like this." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. So now they have reason to be more jealous of them. This is what Nebuchadnezzar does. He praises their God. Now in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has seen that Daniel's God was a revealer of secrets. And in this chapter he sees that Daniel's God, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because they're all together there, they serve the same God, saves. You would think that he would listen up, that he would pay attention, that he could get his life right? But we're going to see in the next couple chapters that's not going to be the case. It's not going to be the case. Seems to have a short memory. Yeah. What does it mean that Jehovah saves, though? God saves. Whichever, Jesus saves. We use that one a lot. What does it mean?
Jesus says, I interpret as a potential what we are saying. Is Jesus facing sin? Yes. Or nothing that facing sin, but there are examples of cases of dangerous ways.
Okay. Look at 1 Peter 4:19. There it says, "Wherefore, let them that suffer according to the will of God commit the keeping of their souls to him in well-doing as unto a faithful Creator." 1 Peter 4:19. What is it that God promises us? Huh? He'll be with us. I looked for it. I thought it was in Joel, but I couldn't find it today. But it talks about there that God is right there with you in a whirlwind or in a storm. He's right there with you. People ask the question sometimes, where was God when this bad thing happened to you? Oh, he was right there with you. Do you not think that being thrown into a fiery furnace is a bad thing that happens to you? Where was God? He was right there with them. Right there with them. And they had enough faith to say, whether he saves us or whether he doesn't, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And this is what they knew. I want to look at two takeaways. We've got about 5 minutes left. We'll look at two takeaways right quick. I want to look at the phrase, "but even if he doesn't." Do we sometimes get frustrated when we're going through a trial? As any human, yes. Things don't turn out the way we want them to, or bad things happen to us. Is it God's fault? Can we always understand God's way? I don't think I can. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to me. Sometimes it didn't make sense to David. He wrote in the Psalms a lot of places where he just, I don't understand. I'm going to ask you something. Why are Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel, why are they in this predicament to begin with? Why are they in the land of Babylon?
They got into that predicament because they were refusing to bow down.
No, I'm talking about in Babylon. Why were they taken into Babylon, into captivity? Why are they slaves? I disagree with you. Because Israel didn't. If you go back 6 kings, 6 generations, you're talking about 150 or so years, Manasseh's sins were so great that God was going to send him off into the Babylonian captivity. That's what the Bible tells us back in 1 Kings, I believe it is, 2 Kings. I didn't bring all those notes with me. But if you go back a generation ahead of that one, you got Hezekiah. Hezekiah was a very good king, but Hezekiah was the one that started the whole thing, in that when the Babylonians came to him, he showed them all his riches. And the prophet told him what? This is a problem. Now you've showed them this, now they're going to get it. But you got that, and then 6 kings later, you got them coming in. It's unfair, right? It's unfair. I don't think they did anything wrong, and I don't mean to argue with you, but I don't think they did anything wrong. I don't think Daniel was of the character to do anything wrong. I don't think they were either. The Jews. But it goes all the way back. In between Manasseh, about 2 or 3 after Manasseh, somewhere right almost in the middle between here and where Manasseh was, you got what's his name? Josiah, the kid that became king. He was a very good one. He was a very good king. Sometimes it just don't happen good. But even if he doesn't save us, they say. Look at John 6 chapter. I'm going to read a few verses there. Jesus is talking here. Jesus says, "Yes, I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, but they all died. Anyone who eats bread from heaven, however, will never die." Jump down to verse 60. Many of the disciples said, this is a very hard to understand. How can anyone accept it? Drop down to verse 66. At this point, many of the disciples turned away and deserted him. Then Jesus turned to his 12 disciples, asked them, "Are you going to leave?" Simon Peter replied, "Lord, to whom would we go? You have the words that give eternal life. We believe and we know that you are the Holy One." Did God leave them? This will be the second point. I'm asking if God left them. Who was the fourth one in the fire? And I'll just give you 2 right quick. If you go back all the way to the burning bush, Moses was standing in front of the burning bush, and he was told to take off his sandals because he was on holy ground. You got another time when Joshua was going just before they took Jericho, just before they started that march around Jericho. He was going out, and he comes up to somebody and he asks him, "Are you friend or foe?" And he says, "I am the commander of the host of the Lord's army." Take your shoes off, you're standing on holy ground. That's twice. Now you've got this picture of someone in there walking with them. And I'm not sure if they had their sandals on or not. Just thoughts that go through my mind. Did God leave them? Where is God? You know, we can look at it. Christians still die with cancer. Christians still die in accidents. Christians still have divorces. Christians have heartaches. Christians have headaches. And every once in a while, we get the red sucked off of our candy. Oh, if you can catch up to that one. That's what we used to say when I was a kid about somebody that's having a bad day. Do we determine God's goodness because of the things that are around us? The good that is in our lives? The protection that He gives us? The life of ease? And we could go on and on and on about the good things that are around us. Do we determine God's goodness because of that? Or is God's goodness determined by the promises He has made to us and what's to come? What's to come? If they lose their lives, do they win or do they lose? They win. That's what Paul said, isn't it? That's what Paul said.
Just like us. We lose our lives, we win.
Yeah.
We have to be like those 3 or 4 individuals. We have to be faithful to the Lord God Almighty.
All right. I'm sorry, I've got you 3 or 4 minutes over. Anybody got a closing comment? Thank you so much for coming. That's a quick trip through the 3rd chapter.